It began, as many mysteries do, not with a scream, nor with the sharp report of a pistol, but with a bell that should have stood silent. That ancient sound rolled out across the windswept hills of Sussex just after midnight, when even the owls had grown quiet and the moon hung veiled behind the clouds. At Whitehaven Mansions, the fireplace cracked with warmth, and I, Captain Arthur Hastings, was attempting to enjoy a late-night game of patience. Across from me sat my friend, Hercule Poirot, unusually quiet, his green eyes lost in the flickering firelight. Then came the knock, soft, deliberate, a sound far too composed for the hour. Our porter, George, appeared with a sealed envelope, his brow furrowed. "No postmark, sir. Delivered by hand." The man refused to leave a name. Poirot opened it. Inside, a single sheet of thick ivory paper, bordered in black. The handwriting was steady, elegant, and unmistakably female. The bell at Hawthorne Hall tolled last night. No one was in the tower. My mother is dead, but I do not believe she died alone. I am afraid. Please come before the second toll. It was signed, Imogen Hawthorne. Poirot sat forward slowly, the lines of weariness vanishing from his face. Lady Hawthorne, Hastings, the widow of Lord Edwin Hawthorne. Do you recall the name? I nodded. A reclusive couple, weren't they? She was a musician, wasn't she? Played the harp at court years ago. Poirot rose, already straightening his cuffs. Yes, but now she is dead, and her daughter fears not grief, but something darker. We must leave immediately. I glanced at the letter again. You think this isn't just a death in the family? Poirot's voice was low. Non, mon ami. A bell that tolls itself, a warning that speaks of fear, and a family that once buried secrets as deep as their silver. This is no ordinary passing. This is something old, something unfinished. By morning, we were on the train to Sussex, the countryside unfolding in gray mists beyond the window. Poirot sat in silence, polishing his watch chain absently. I could see the cogs turning. The letter had unsettled him, though he would never admit it. And I, for my part, felt that strange tension that always accompanied our journeys into the unknown, a pull of both dread and anticipation. Hawthorne Hall emerged from the fog, like a memory the earth had tried to forget. Ivy smothered its walls. Its chimneys stood like crooked fingers pointed at the sky. A single light glowed in the front window, as though the house itself held its breath. We were met at the door not by servants, but by Imogen Hawthorne herself. She was young, perhaps no more than 23, but her face was drawn with grief beyond her years. Her hands trembled as she greeted us. "You came," she whispered. Poirot bowed gently. "You feared a second toll, mademoiselle. We are here to ensure it never sounds." She led us down a corridor where the portraits of long-dead Hawthornes gazed from their dusty frames. My mother was found yesterday morning, in the chapel, beneath the bell tower. No signs of violence. The doctor said it was her heart. But she hesitated before continuing. I heard her crying the night before, through the walls, and then the bell rang. Once, and I swear to you, Monsieur Poirot, no one was in the tower. The stairs were locked. They always are. No one should have been able to reach the bell rope. But I heard it. I heard it clearly. We entered a dark drawing room where the fireplace was unlit, and the air thick with candle wax and perfume. A harp stood in the corner, polished, unplayed. Poirot moved toward it at once, laying his hand gently across the strings. "She played every night," Imogen whispered, "except the last." "And who else remains in the house now?" Poirot asked. "Only Miss Brand, my mother's secretary, and Forsyth, the groundskeeper. My father," she hesitated. "He has not spoken since her death. He has not even come out of his study." Poirot turned, his expression unreadable. "Then we must speak for him. And for your mother. Because whatever happened beneath that tower, mademoiselle, it did not begin yesterday. No, it began long before the bell ever tolled." And with that, our journey into the heart of Hawthorne Hall began, not a search for a murderer yet, but for something more fragile and dangerous, the truth buried beneath years of silence, regret, and legacy. Vale Abbey's chapel stood like a shadow of the past, its bell tower rising above the frost-hushed trees, silent for years. Imogen led us down the narrow path, her steps slow, voice taut. I found her under the bell, cold as the stone she lay on. They say it was natural, but I know better. Inside, the air was heavy, scented faintly of incense and something metallic. The great golden harp stood untouched, its strings slashed, as if the music had been silenced in violence. On the bier beneath the bell lay Lady Arabella Hawthorne, her body unnaturally still, fingers curled tightly. Poirot moved quietly, eyes scanning everything, the dust, the footprints, the rope that hung from the bell. Strange, Hastings. The bell tolled that night, yet no one was here to ring it, and the chapel was locked. We questioned Miss Brand, the house secretary. Stern, quiet, and cold as the stones around her, she confirmed she had locked the chapel herself at 9. But she was afraid lately, she admitted. Your Lady Hawthorne. She said something had returned, something old. Poirot glanced at the shattered strings of the harp. And you, he asked. Miss Brand's voice was low. I believe someone wanted her silence. Outside, the wind stirred. Poirot turned to me as we walked back. This is no ordinary death, Hastings. The bell tolled once for a woman who knew too much. Now it tolls for the truth. The next morning, Poirot and I explored the grounds of Vale Abbey. The air was sharp, and a dull mist hung low across the hedgerows. The bell tower loomed behind us, its silence more threatening in daylight than it had been in the dark. Beneath the ivy-lined wall, Poirot paused. Regard as Hastings, he murmured, crouching to the earth. Footprints, one set, narrow, light a woman's, but they lead nowhere, as though she walked into the wall itself. Or was watching, I suggested. Poirot nodded slowly. Yes, watching. We returned to the drawing room where Imogen sat, pale but composed. Across from her stood Edward Hale, her half-brother, stoic, unreadable, his fingers tapping the armrest of a faded velvet chair. We all heard the bell, Edward said flatly, but the door was locked. No one entered, except perhaps someone who never left, murmured Imogen. Poirot tilted his head. What do you mean, mademoiselle? She hesitated. Before her death, my mother spoke of a presence. She said the harp had begun playing by itself. She wasn't well, but it frightened her. She believed it was a warning. Poirot's gaze swept the room, settling on the portrait above the fireplace. Lady Arabella, younger, her face serene, but her painted eyes strangely mournful. You see, Hastings, Poirot said quietly as we left, sometimes the dead leave behind more than memories. They leave questions, and secrets they never meant to share. That afternoon, as clouds thickened over Vale Abbey and the wind began to murmur through the cloisters, Poirot requested to see the personal belongings of the late Lady Arabella. Imogen guided us to her mother's study, a dim room thick with the scent of old paper and lavender oil, every book precisely aligned, every item in its place. But one desk drawer, jammed halfway, refused to open smoothly. Inside, Poirot found a crumpled sheet of parchment, sealed but never posted. He unfolded it slowly. The ink had blurred slightly, as though tears had once fallen upon the page. To whoever finds this, if anything happens to me, know this. There are truths in this house I tried to bury with silence. My sins are not crimes of blood, but of cowardice. I feared the past, feared what would happen if it ever returned. I believe it already has. If you hear the harp play after midnight, do not follow it. Poirot handed the note to me in silence. My fingers tightened instinctively. You think she wrote this just before she died? He didn't answer. Instead, his gaze shifted to a small harp in the corner, strings covered with a fine lace cloth. Mademoiselle Imogen, Poirot said gently, did your mother ever mention someone named Caleb? Imogen froze. The color drained from her face. No one ever said his name aloud in this house. But she knew of him. She nodded once. My mother had a brother. Or at least, that's what the whispers always said. Born in secret. Said to be deformed. They locked him away when he was a child. I thought it was just family legend. Poirot leaned forward, eyes narrowing. And did Cecilia ever speak of him? There was a pause, then Imogen whispered, She said someone sang to her from behind the walls. Poirot rose slowly. This house, Hastings, is not haunted by ghosts, but by people forced into silence. That night, as the clock struck 12, the harp played again, one note, long and trembling, like the sound of someone exhaling their last truth. The next morning brought a stillness too perfect to trust. The skies hung low and gray over Vale Abbey, and a thin mist crept in through the cracks of the old windows like a forgotten breath. Poirot rose early, his eyes sharper than usual. He had slept little, and I could sense that something in the night's music had altered his course. "Today, Hastings," he said quietly, "we search for a room that does not exist. At least, not in the records." Imogen met us near the east corridor, her expression troubled. "You're looking for the hidden wing, aren't you?" she said before we could speak. Poirot arched a brow. "So you knew." She glanced around and lowered her voice. "There's a passage behind the chapel. It leads to the oldest part of the estate. My mother forbade anyone from going near it. Even as a child, I was told that part of the house had been sealed after the fire." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Fire? 30 years ago. My grandmother, she perished in it. At least, that's what the family said." Without waiting for further permission, Poirot took the lead. We followed the winding halls to a narrow wooden door almost hidden behind an armoire. Imogen hesitated. "I've never seen it opened." Poirot pressed gently. The door creaked open with a groan of warped wood. Inside was dust, thick, untouched. The corridor beyond was cloaked in a stale coldness, as though the air had not moved in decades. We moved slowly, passing faded portraits and broken sconces. Then we reached it, a small door with a brass plaque. The name had been scratched off, but beneath it, faintly visible in the metal, were the letters CL. "Caleb-less," Poirot murmured. Inside was a room no larger than a prison cell. The walls were lined with faded drawings, childlike sketches of birds, trees, music notes. And in the corner, a small iron-framed bed, the mattress long decayed. On the wall, burned into the stone, were 4 deep grooves, like claw marks. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "He lived here," Poirot said softly. "Hidden, forgotten, a boy locked away from the world." On the windowsill, a cracked harp string lay coiled like a serpent. Poirot picked it up gently. He watched them live their lives, heard Cecilia's music, and when she stopped playing, something broke. From the darkness, a single word had been scratched again and again across the woodwork. "Listen." Poirot turned to me. "Someone is still listening, Hastings, and I believe we are not alone in this house." That evening, as the light thinned and the abbey settled into its strange silence, Poirot sat in the cloister garden, unmoving, his gaze fixed on the scorched stonework beneath the chapel window. "Do you smell it, Hastings?" he asked quietly. I paused. There was something faint, not quite smoke, but like the ghost of something once burned and buried. "Charcoal and damp parchment," Poirot continued. "Both are the smells of secrets destroyed." Inside, the household had grown tense. Imogen barely spoke. Father Simeon's sermons grew shorter. Even the housekeeper, Miss Weathering, moved through the halls like someone being watched. The house itself seemed to shrink, its long corridors darker, colder, less forgiving. Poirot called a meeting that night in the old library, insisting that everyone attend. "This abbey," he began, "has kept a tomb inside itself, not of stone, but of silence, and it has begun to speak." He placed on the table a folded bundle wrapped in linen, retrieved from the hidden room that morning. Inside, a charred diary. The cover had been branded with the initial CL, and inside, though much of the ink had bled or burned away, a few lines had survived. She played for me again. I knew the notes before her hands touched the strings. "We are the same song, split in 2. But Mother said I must not speak, that if I loved her, I must vanish. If I vanish, will she stop playing too?" Silence filled the room. Imogen's face was pale, her hands trembling slightly. "I never knew," she whispered. "I never knew it was real." But Poirot wasn't finished. He turned to Father Simeon. "You cared for Caleb in secret, fed him, clothed him, tried to comfort what the rest of the family abandoned. And yet, When Cecilia came close to freeing him, you said nothing. The young priest lowered his gaze. I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen to him if they knew. Afraid of what he might become. Poirot nodded gravely. And what has he become, I wonder? A shadow? A ghost? Or simply a man who has never known love except through a wall? He turned then to Miss Weathering. You, madam, burned the first diary. You found it hidden beneath Cecilia's mattress after she died. You told yourself it was for the family's safety. She flinched, but did not deny it. I thought it was madness, she whispered. Words of someone unraveling. No, said Poirot. They were words of someone remembering. Twins share more than blood. Sometimes they share the same ache, and when you tear one in half, the other bleeds. At that moment, the candles flickered. Somewhere deep within the walls, a low moan echoed, the old iron pipes, or something else, we could not say. But Poirot's face remained calm. He's still here, he said quietly, somewhere beneath this abbey, listening, waiting. Then he looked directly at Imogen. And you, mademoiselle, you are the key. A storm rolled in that night, silent at first, then mounting with a wind that whispered through every cracked pane and rattled every forgotten hinge of Vale Abbey. The old building seemed to hold its breath as though it, too, sensed the turning of something ancient. In the drawing room, the shadows deepened. Imogen sat curled on the edge of a chaise, her fingers wrapped tightly around the broken locket she had found among Cecilia's old belongings. Poirot paced slowly before the fireplace, eyes half closed, as if listening to something that hadn't yet been said aloud. You said I am the key, Imogen finally whispered. But I don't understand. I didn't know Caleb. I barely knew Cecilia. Ah, you were protected from knowing. Poirot interrupted gently, but not blind. The heart often senses truths the mind is told to ignore. He stopped pacing, facing her directly now. Tell me about the stone. Imogen blinked. What stone? The one Cecilia gave you before she died. The green one. The one you keep hidden in your music box. Her mouth fell slightly open. How? I saw the outline of it in the drawer. The velvet indentation. You've removed it, yes? She hesitated, then nodded slowly, reaching into the pocket of her robe. From it, she pulled a small, polished stone, celadone in color, shaped like a teardrop, threaded with what looked like veins of gold beneath its surface. She said it was from Caleb, Imogen murmured, that he gave it to her when they were small. She told me to keep it safe, no matter what. Poirot took the stone gently, holding it to the firelight. His eyes narrowed. It is not just a trinket. It's a cipher. A key, yes, but not for a door. For a place. He turned abruptly to me. Hastings, fetch my coat and the lantern. We are going beneath the abbey. The rain was falling harder now as we descended the cellar steps, the old iron rails slick with damp. At the far end of the wine vault, beyond rows of crumbling casks, Poirot paused before a stack of loose bricks. He ran his hand along the mortar, then nodded. Bring me the stone. Imogen passed it forward, and Poirot pressed it into a small indentation at the edge of the wall. There was a faint click, and with surprising ease, the brickwork shifted, revealing a narrow stone passage behind it. The air within was thick, stale, tinged with rot and salt. The lantern cast long shadows on the curved walls, dancing across faded symbols and carvings etched by trembling hands. We moved carefully, our steps muffled by the damp earth below. Then we found it, a chamber low and wide, the walls lined with candle stubs melted into ancient sconces. In the center, a stone cot. Shackles lay twisted and empty upon it. Beside it, a small table, a broken harp string coiled neatly atop it like a lock of hair. And carved into the wall, the words. She sang for me. I will wait in her silence. Imogen stepped forward slowly, her breath catching. Caleb. Poirot did not speak. He crouched beside the cot, retrieving a worn scrap of parchment from beneath the dust. It was a page from a journal, written in a child's hand. They say I am cursed. They say my face frightens the angels. But she never looked away. She said we were two notes in the same chord. I turned to Poirot. Do you think he's dead? Poirot shook his head. No. This chamber has been recently disturbed. He left, but not long ago. The footprints in the dust, see? They lead out. And they are not alone. Then who else came down here? Poirot straightened slowly, eyes fixed on the narrow tunnel behind us. The one who tried to erase him. The one who saw this room not as a shameful memory, but as a threat. Imogen stared at him. Arabella. He nodded once, solemnly. She came here the night Cecilia died, to finish what she began decades ago. As we turned to leave the chamber, a gust of wind blew down the passage behind us, and with it, a sound that made my blood run cold. Music, distant, discordant, like a harp string plucked far away, or deep within the walls. Poirot did not flinch. He's calling, he whispered, and this time we must answer. The corridors of Vale Abbey had always held their secrets, but that night they seemed to awaken with a memory older than anyone alive. The wind battered the stained-glass windows like fists from some ancient storm, and in the darkened hallways, the flickering of our lanterns revealed corners of shadow that twisted and recoiled as if resentful of being disturbed. We moved through the abbey with caution, following the echo of a sound that should not have been, music that crept along the stone walls like breathless weeping. Poirot led the way, his steps precise and deliberate. Imogen walked beside him, her face pale but resolved, the celadon stone still clutched in her hand. I brought up the rear, every nerve in my body alert to the strange resonance around us, the oppressive weight of secrets no longer content to sleep. The music was clearer now, an unsteady plucking of harp strings, like fingers testing memories too painful to recall. We followed it not upward, but downward, descending a spiral stair behind the vestry, through a narrow door previously hidden by a tapestry of the Last Judgment. The stair opened into a subterranean chapel, older than the rest of the abbey, its architecture worn with time and soot. Candles burned here, freshly lit. The air was thick with incense and something else, sorrow. And there, at the far end, beneath an altar of cracked marble, sat a man, or rather, the ghost of one. His hair hung in damp curls around a gaunt, dirt-smudged face. His eyes, large and too knowing, flicked upward as we entered. In his lap rested a crude harp, patched together from broken wood and wire, and his fingers trembled upon its strings. Caleb, Imogen breathed. The man flinched at the name, like it had struck him across the face. Poirot did not speak immediately. He approached slowly, bowing his head slightly as one might before a wounded animal. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Lys," he said gently. "You called, and we have come." Caleb's voice, when it came, was soft and strange, high and cracked, as though unused for years. "I didn't mean to hurt her. She said we would go away. She promised." Poirot knelt before him. "You did not hurt her, but someone else did. Someone who feared the truth she was willing to set free." "I sang for her," Caleb whispered, "even when they locked me in. She could hear me through the pipes. She said my songs made her feel whole." "Your music," Poirot said, "was the thread that held you both together." He glanced at Imogen. But when Cecilia told Arabella, she meant to reveal the truth, to tell the world she had a brother, and that he lived. The silence returned. Caleb's fingers stilled. She gave her the tea, the bitter one, the one that makes dreams last forever. Imogen's hand flew to her mouth. Mother poisoned her. She couldn't allow the family name to be stained, Poirot said grimly. Not with madness, not with memory. Caleb slowly stood, the harp falling from his hands, forgotten. She said I didn't belong to the world, that I was a crack in the mirror. And yet, Poirot whispered, stepping aside, you remain. Suddenly, a sound behind us. Footsteps. Arabella stood at the stair's edge, her face drained of all color. Her eyes met Caleb's, and something passed between them. Recognition, horror, resignation. You were never supposed to come back, she said. I buried you once. I mourned you. Do not ask me to do it again. I never asked to be born, Caleb said quietly. Poirot stepped between them. Madam, it ends now. The lie has already crumbled. The fire, the deaths, the silence, they scream now in every stone of this abbey. She looked at him with sudden weariness, as though a dam within her had cracked. I was young. I was told he would bring ruin. My husband made me choose, legacy or love. And once I chose, I couldn't stop choosing. Caleb said nothing. He only turned away, walking to a narrow bench before the altar and sitting once more, his back to her, to us. Poirot watched him for a long moment, then turned to Arabella. You will confess. To the constable, to the court, and to yourself. Arabella's voice broke as she nodded. I will. We left the chapel in silence. The harp did not play again. As we emerged into the cold breath of dawn, Vale Abbey seemed to exhale with us, its windows shimmering with the first light of morning. The storm had passed, but its echo would remain, etched in the quiet spaces where music once lived. And behind us, in the chapel below, a man who had lived in silence strummed at a harp of broken strings, alone but unafraid, letting the last of his sister's songs slip quietly into the air. The sun rose reluctantly over Vale Abbey, casting long amber fingers through the frost-streaked windows, as if unsure whether it should touch a place so heavy with the residue of truth. The storm had passed, but the air still held its memory, a deep, pulsing stillness that felt less like peace and more like aftermath. Inside the grand hall, silence reigned, not the hollow silence of absence, but one weighted with all that had finally come to light. Arabella Liss sat alone in the conservatory, her black veil removed, her hands folded neatly in her lap, like someone awaiting sentencing. She no longer cried. Her eyes had done all the weeping they would ever do. When Poirot entered, she looked up not with surprise, nor even resentment, but with the dulled acceptance of a woman who knew her part in the tragedy could no longer be buried beneath roses and legacy. I spoke with the magistrate, she said before Poirot could speak. There will be a hearing. I will not fight it. Poirot gave a small nod. You understand now that justice is not the same as vengeance. She looked out at the frost on the hedges. I don't know what I understand anymore, except that I have spent a lifetime pruning truth like ivy, cutting it away when it threatened to grow too wild. Poirot's voice softened. And in doing so, you left a boy to grow in darkness, a girl to love in secret, and a house to fill with ghosts. Arabella didn't respond. Perhaps she had no defense left to give. We found Imogen by the broken harp that once belonged to Cecilia. She sat cross-legged on the rug, the golden strings now reattached, each one glinting softly in the light. Yet she did not play it. Her fingers hovered above the strings, trembling, as though they feared to summon something more than music. He won't come back upstairs, she said quietly. He's still in the chapel. He says it's the only place he feels real. Poirot knelt beside her. Let him rest. For now. What he endured, no brother should. But what he preserved, his memory of her, his love. It brought the truth to the surface. Imogen looked up, eyes damp but steady. Will he ever be normal? No, Poirot said simply. But perhaps something better. Free. Later that afternoon, we watched from the drive as the constables took Arabella away. She did not weep or resist. She merely cast one last glance at the abbey, as if saying farewell not to a home, but to the illusion it had long protected. Inside, Caleb remained beneath the chapel, now with a cot and blankets, a small heater humming beside him. He did not speak much. He ate what he was given, and at dusk he played, never full songs, but fragments of melody, as though summoning pieces of Cecilia from the corners of memory. Poirot stood at the chapel doorway and listened, his hands folded behind his back, his expression unreadable. Do you regret coming? I asked him. He shook his head slowly. No, because some crimes are not meant to be solved with handcuffs alone. Some demand that we hold a mirror to human nature and simply look without flinching. As we prepared to leave Vale Abbey, Imogen pressed a folded envelope into Poirot's hand. For when you return to London, she said. Cecilia wrote it the day before she died. She asked me never to open it. Poirot read it on the train, in silence. When he finished, he closed his eyes and whispered, She forgave them all. Then he passed the letter to me. It read, If they ask why I stayed, tell them I stayed for a boy who never had a name, for a song no one else could hear. And if I vanish, know this, My harp never played for applause. It played to remind the silence it could still be broken. As the train pulled away from the countryside, the abbey faded behind the hills, becoming once more a silhouette of memory. Not forgotten, not forgiven, but finally unburdened. London greeted us not with fanfare, but with its usual gray hush, the kind that clings to your collar and nestles between the cracks of thought. The rattle of the train tracks slowly gave way to cobblestones and gaslight as we returned to Whitehaven Mansions, yet the silence of Vale Abbey lingered with us still. It clung to Poirot more tightly than to me. In his eyes I saw not the satisfaction of a case solved, but the solemn weight of truths unearthed too late to save the innocent from suffering. That evening, Poirot sat quietly by the hearth, his usual cup of tisane untouched, the envelope containing Cecilia's final words resting on the table beside him. Outside, the city moved indifferently, buses sighing at corners, boots echoing in alleyways, life continuing untroubled. Inside, however, there was reflection. She did not die for nothing, Hastings, Poirot said at last. She lived and chose to see. She uncovered what no one dared name. And Caleb? I asked. What becomes of him? Poirot exhaled softly, almost reverently. He is not mad. He is wounded. But he will mend. Not in the way society calls normal, but in the way only the soul understands. He has heard the harp in silence. That changes a man. I thought of the cellar beneath the chapel, of a boy growing alone beneath stone and shadow, nourished only by music and memory. And I thought of Cecilia, who had risked everything to reach him, not for spectacle, not for rebellion, but for love. Arabella Liss will stand before the magistrate, I said. But what punishment fits such a crime? Poirot glanced at the fire. There are punishments beyond prison, mon ami. To live knowing your silence murdered your daughter, that is a cell without bars but with no key. The following morning, we received a letter from Imogen. Enclosed was a photograph, Caleb standing in the garden behind the ruins of the chapel, sunlight dappling his shoulders. He held the harp, restored, glimmering, and beside him stood Imogen, her hand resting gently on his. A simple image, but to us it said everything. Poirot studied the photograph for a long time. Then he placed it into the small velvet drawer beside his desk, reserved only for a handful of memories he deemed sacred. Not all ghosts haunt with chains, he murmured. Some haunt with music, with love that refused to look away. That night, as I drifted off in my chair by the fire, I thought of Vale Abbey, of its cloisters, its secrets, and its golden harp that once sang for shadows. And I thought of how, in the end, it was not justice alone that brought resolution, but remembrance. For Cecilia's music no longer echoed from behind walls. It had risen, it had been heard, and it would not be forgotten. As the fire dimmed, I heard Poirot's voice, low and certain. Sometimes, Hastings, the most powerful voice is the one that dares to speak through silence. And in that silence, I too heard the harp, its notes soft, whole, and finally at peace.